Hello and welcome to day 2 of the INPCS annual meeting. It's my pleasure and honor to welcome and to give our Neuropalliative Care Advocate of the Year award to Susan Schneider Williams. For those of you who didn't see it, last night we had a screening of the amazing film Robin's Wish, which talks about Robin's journey as well as Susan's journey through the diagnosis and missed opportunities to come to correct diagnosis with his Lewy body dementia and the implications. It also talks about her launch into the world of advocacy, which was never part of her life plans. Prior to marrying Robin, Susan was a graphic artist and a painter of some renown in her own right, and has been continuing to be an active painter and a teacher of painting. In 2014, she became an advocate because of Robin Williams' death and has really done amazing work in a very short period of time. She began the Lewy Body Dementia Fund. She is now the vice chair of the American Brain Foundation. She has won numerous awards for her advocacy, and I think Robin's Wish is really just putting icing on the cake. She has done a number of other speaking engagements, all of which have been centered around the importance of the correct diagnosis and the journey of patients and families. And with that, I'd like to welcome Susan. We look forward to hearing your remarks, and thank you again as our second annual Advocate of the Year.
Thank you to the International Neuropalliative Care Society for asking me to speak and for honoring me with the Advocate of the Year award. It really feels like a great honor, and I'm so grateful, and it means a lot. So thank you. And frankly, I kind of feel like all of you should be getting an award too for the work you do at the INPCS. I mean, chartering a whole new territory, one that is deeply needed in establishing better support for those affected by neurological illness, that is huge. So thank you and bravo. So Lewy body dementia, does a diagnosis matter? The arc of our story is really about diagnosis and the fact that we didn't have an accurate one. So I'm going to talk about what that was like and how that defined my personal mission going forward. Some of you may not have known that it wasn't until Robin's autopsy that we got an accurate diagnosis. He received a Parkinson's diagnosis a few months before he passed, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. And right now, there is no highly accurate method or accepted biomarker for diagnosing somebody with Lewy body disease while they're alive, though a lot of progress is being made. And in 2016, when I wrote the editorial, The Terrorist Inside My Husband's Brain, at the time, I was convinced that a diagnosis wouldn't matter anyway, since there is no cure. But I can tell you my thinking since then has completely changed. Diagnosis is everything, not just for the patients and caregivers, but for the doctors, clinicians, and researchers. If we'd had an accurate diagnosis, we could have sought specialized care. Maybe Robin would have participated in clinical trials or donated to research. We could have found the LBD community. The bottom line is that Robin wouldn't have had to feel so afraid, and we wouldn't have had to waste so much precious time trying to figure out what was going on. So I want to pop back in time for a moment to an important date, November 3rd, 2014, 11:30 a.m. That was about 3 months after Robin had passed, and it's when the coroner's report was read to me. I remember walking up those steps to the sheriff's department with my father, a retired pathologist. And on the other side of that door, the forensic pathologist and the lead detective were going to sit down with me and my dad and go over the autopsy report. What I heard on that day was difficult and shocking. And I can tell you it made perfect sense. And for the first time, I heard the name of my husband's killer, Lewy body disease, LBD. Lewy body disease is the abnormal deposits of the alpha-synuclein protein in the brain. I think of it like damaged proteins running around, well, not necessarily running around, but damaged proteins sabotaging all the communications. And the fact was nearly every region of Robin's brain and brainstem was riddled with them. It was one of the worst cases they've ever seen. So with the name of the disease, what Robin and I have been looking for so long, over a year, I began an unexpected journey, a journey into understanding the science behind what we'd gone through. Now, along the way, I found out about some key hallmarks of LBD. And I found out, for example, that I wasn't imagining it, that Robin's symptoms over 40 were appearing and disappearing randomly. That's a hallmark of LBD. And we were exhausted from chasing all these symptoms. None of the doctors knew that they were all connected, that there was a ghost disease underlying all of this. Robin's cognitive difficulties, memory problems, and insomnia, combined with the tremors, shuffling gait, and Parkinsonian mask. And the one he hated so much, trouble finding words. For such a master wordsmith, I can't imagine the loss that he felt just at that one thing alone. The pain Robin felt was real, and so was mine. I'd become a caregiver without knowing it. And no longer was there a break between day and night for us. It was all about managing his symptoms, including the really difficult one of delusional looping. So another hallmark is that Robin was so sensitive to medications, and most people with LBD are. The medications can have unpredictable effects, making it really difficult to treat. At one point, the doctors put Robin on antipsychotic medication, and he was taken off a few days later when the confusion had become too much. Well, it turns out that antipsychotics can be dangerous to someone with LBD. They can cause slurred speech, increase confusion, and can even speed up the disease progression, which is sometimes irreversible once the medication is removed. Now, Robin and I, we had each other's backs, and we shared everything. After reviewing the coroner's report, though, and other medical records with a few professionals, doctors in the field, I found out that he had kept perhaps the worst symptom from me. He hid the fact that he was hallucinating. But could I really blame him? I mean, I'd probably have done the same thing. The unchecked anxiety and paranoia combined with hallucinations, that would be too much for anyone. Hallucinations, though, are a key hallmark of this disease and can really help in diagnosing the disease. Now, I want to talk about prevalence for a moment. You know, Robin and I really felt like we were alone in this. It would have been nice to know that we weren't. The estimated number of individuals currently affected by LBD in the United States is about 1 million. Parkinson's is between 500,000 to 1 million, and Alzheimer's as many as 5 million. Now, these numbers are from the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, NINDS. I'm sure they're on the conservative side, but they do paint a picture of this disease space. And these diseases have so much crossover in symptoms that it's not uncommon to have misdiagnosis and switch diagnosis. It's no wonder then, without an accurate biomarker, that the doctors couldn't get to the bottom of what was going on. You know, I learned some very surprising things along the way. And one of the things I learned was that Lewy body, Parkinson's, and Alzheimer's patients can have mixed pathology. In fact, I learned from the autopsy that Robin had the pathology of all three: Lewy body, Parkinson's, and Alzheimer's. That was shocking to me. And another surprising thing I learned was the relationship between Parkinson's and Lewy body. That is a spectrum disease. On one end, you have Parkinson's, on the other end, Lewy body, and they have the same essential underlying shared biology. That is the Lewy bodies themselves. So depending which symptoms present first can determine whether you are diagnosed with Parkinson's or with Lewy body. So in effect, Robin's Parkinson's diagnosis marks the end of his disease progression and not the beginning. You know, I also learned that LBD it's a neurological problem. It's a circuitry problem. So the chemical changes that were happening in Robin's brain were responsible for the psychiatric symptoms. The net result was, without an accurate diagnosis, his symptoms were being treated rather than the disease. A lot of people would ask me, how could this have happened to Robin? He was such a genius. How could it happen so fast? Well, I found out that highly intelligent people have greater cognitive reserve, and that allows them to stave off the symptoms longer than most, but then it's like the dam suddenly breaks and they can't hold it back any longer. So in effect, their decline can appear more rapid when it's been going on all along. Now, it's important to note that Robin and I, we were working with a lot of medical professionals, but they were not under the same roof and they weren't all communicating as a team. And we had one general physician, one general neurologist, one motor specialist, two psychologists, a few alternative care specialists, one physical trainer, and a hypnotherapist. And after the autopsy, when I started trying to understand the disease, I found out how little was known about LBD, that it wasn't even on the menu at most doctors' offices. I remember when we were at the general neurologist's office, and Robin had just found out about his Parkinson's diagnosis. And at the end of that appointment, a very short appointment, which they typically are, Robin asked, do I have dementia, Alzheimer's? Am I schizophrenic? The doctor's answer was no, no, and no. We'll get you on this medication and you're going to be fine. Well, with what I know now, looking back, the proper thing to ask would have been, what makes you think that, Robin? What makes you think that? So when Robin decided to end this disease, we were a week away from deciding upon which inpatient neurocognitive testing facility that he would go to. So the reality is we were probably pretty close to getting an accurate diagnosis, even though it's just by deduction at this point, but we were getting there. Robin was tired. He was tired of Robin was tired of all the testing, and all the results were coming back negative, except for one. He had very high cortisol levels. So personally, how did we cope with all of this? How are we coping through this? I can tell you we did one of Robin's favorite things. We improvised. The definition of improvisation is zero practice. So when Robin could no longer access his own creativity and his whole work calendar was cleared by his managers, I brought him with him into my creativity. I brought him with me into mine. And we went on early morning photo shoots for some of the paintings I would paint. He helped me title paintings. I took him to my framers with me and he helped me with that. And he enjoyed that. He was locked out of his own. So it felt safe having him in with mine for both of us. And when Robin could, when he could no longer drive, I drove us. One of the symptoms of LBD is that you have difficulty in judging distance and depth. So driving gets really difficult. And when he could no longer read, he was an avid reader. It was brilliant. When we could no longer do that for various reasons, mostly anxiety, I would read to him. I would read to us. And what we found in this improvisation was the simple and familiar things brought us both the most comfort, as simple as sharing a meal together as we did, and reviewing our days together throughout the day, being with family and friends, walking the dog, the real familiar things. So today, when people ask me if someone's concerned about whether a loved one has LBD and what to do, there are a few suggestions that I make, and these are truly from our experience. And it's one of the important things, as I pointed out earlier, just about our care team, or well, not necessarily a team, it should be a team. So I point out that it's really important to get specialty care and to work with a team and make sure that your team knows it's a team, that they're communicating with each other. And another thing is that the lead doctor should know about LBD, Parkinson's, and Alzheimer's. That person should be a specialist. There should also be a movement disorder specialist. Those are the people who are really good with the medications and experienced with the meds. They would know, for example, that antipsychotics can't be tolerated by someone with LBD. Although I have to say, I think there's a new antipsychotic out, one or two, that is tolerable. So definitely check with your professional. And I also suggest, if you have a diagnosis, you know what it is, consider participating in research trials, or maybe donating to research, or simply just being open about the fact that you have this disease with your family and friends, and maybe even a wider circle with the public. Every aspect of this disease helps. So to wrap it up, ever since the accurate diagnosis in autopsy, I've been trying to make this disease visible in whatever ways I can so that others don't have to go through what Robin and I went through. And over these past 8 years, I've shared my experience with a lot of people. And I've gotten to play a small but rewarding part in the solution. I spent 6 years on the board at the American Brain Foundation, the last 4 as their vice chair. And while there, I got to help establish a Lewy Body Dementia fund and spearhead a $3 million research grant targeted at finding an early biomarker for LBD. I am forever grateful to those who gave enormously and generously of their time, talent, and treasure to make that opportunity possible. The main partners on the project, along with individual donors, are the Alzheimer's Association, the Michael J. Fox Foundation, and the American Academy of Neurology. It's been a true collaboration. Another way I could help was I participated in a documentary film, actually 2. And the main one, Robin's Wish, is playing in over 60 countries to critically acclaimed reviews and a certified fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes. There's also an educational version of the film called Spark, and that's available to groups and institutions to help raise awareness and funds for LBD research. To find out more about these films, please go to robinswishfilm.com. Now, in closing, I just want to say that along this unexpected journey, I've met so many incredible people along the way. Many of you who are nothing short of heroic in your own efforts to make LBD and difficult diseases like it more visible and understandable for doctors, clinicians, and researchers, and the caregivers, and most especially for those, the bravest of all, the ones who have these diseases. So I just want to say thank you for introducing the world to the importance of neuropalliative care and for all of your efforts to this date and going forward. Thank you so much.
Hello, and thank you. Welcome back, and welcome back, Susan.
Thank you.
For people in the audience, feel free to use the Q&A function, and I will try to field as many questions as I can. And I do have some questions from last night's showing, as well as some other questions on our board. And I might like to start. So we watched the film yesterday, and it was great to hear about the making of the film. It was great to hear about the journey of the film afterwards. Heard about your work with the American Brain Foundation. I'm curious to know, what are you focused on right now? Where's your advocacy energy going?
Earlier this year, I participated in a conference called Life Itself that was put on by Sanjay Gupta and Mark Hadosh. And there I got to give a 10-minute concise story, which you just heard basically. But I think that that was filmed by CNN, and it's been put out there. It was covered very well in an article by Kristen Rogers as well. And so that to me felt like a really targeted event to participate in that would elevate the message to a even broader audience. And the challenge of that was really talking about these difficult issues in a manner that could be digested by a broad audience, someone who's 10 years old or 80, anywhere in between. And I felt like that achieved it. At least I gave it my best shot, and I think it's been pretty well received. So what I'm continuing to do is really keep my hands on the research a little bit with that research grant award through the ABF, American Brain Foundation, and Dr. Owen Ross and what his team are achieving through the blood-based approach, and with other groups. I mean, I'm so honored to be here today with you guys and to participate in this, and to just help where I can on occasion.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the questions, and this is actually a question I had as well. So I'd love to go out of business, and I'd love it if we had a cure. The other thing that I'd love to see is that if everybody in the world had access to really high quality care, which is our reason for existence, is really trying to elevate care so that you and Robin, get the care that you deserve. And so I wonder what reflections that you would have for Robin, and what reflections you would have for yourself of what do you think the care should look like for people who are on this journey.
Yeah, I think, as I said in the talk just there, having a team that's got your back, a team that is communicating, at least it's not that everyone has to have the answers, because it's a challenging situation, a challenging disease, but to at least be communicating about what's going on, and so that there's a solution, so that solutions are happening, so that you're remaining in the solution instead of spiraling down. And particularly for the patient, it's an incredibly lonely disease, and for the patient and for the caregivers, and the patient. I always felt like, when I think about what Robin went through and what that experience was like for us, it was like watching your loved one sink in quicksand, and there's nothing you can do, really. And so I think with the team approach, at least the person is allowed a lot more respect and understanding from the general public around them, and from their family and friends and loved ones. You're with a community immediately too, if you have a diagnosis, right? Which we didn't know what this was. I think one of Robin's greatest fears was that he was going crazy. And it's really easy to believe that if you have this disease and you don't have someone telling you, no, this is what this is. It's, and this is what's going on. So yeah, I just think it's important to have really good caregivers around you that are all informed. And at the end of the day, Benzie, as you know from your work, I mean, at the end of the day, it's just, we're all human, and this is a human being who's on this journey. We're all going to have our own journeys. We don't know what bumps are on the road for us, but to have the presence of someone who's compassionate and understands a little bit about this disease, and is tied into a group of good caregivers who understand as well. That's really the most important thing. And eventually we'll get to preventions and cures. But for the meanwhile, the work you're doing, and INPCS, like it's shining a light on how important this is.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That ties into one of our questions here. So this is from Nancy, who actually was on a similar journey as you. She's also a caregiver whose husband died. And she asks, as a new organization, we are exploring ways we can grow our influence, advocacy, and delivery of services. What do you think we are uniquely positioned to offer patients and care partners?
I think you guys are kind of, you can become the gold standard for, this is what, you're on the front lines, really, with the patients and caregivers. And, I think offering them just really digestible ideas and ideas around structure of what they can do with this part of their journey. And a really important part of that is offering them the truth. In my opinion, I've seen it's very difficult for some neurologists to deliver the news, to say what's really going on. And you can't really blame them, because A, they probably haven't been trained for that, and B, they don't have a cure to hand the person. They don't, so that's just the state right now. But I think for the caregivers and people who are on the front lines toward the end of this journey, is to really even at the beginning of this journey, which tends to not be that long, is really the truth.
Mhm.
And again, this comes back to the fact that you are bringing to people in this situation respect and honor, the integrity, all of us deserve to know the truth. That's my opinion on our health. And it wasn't that long ago, as my dad, retired pathologist, reminded me, that we weren't even allowed to see our own medical records.
Right.
So things have changed a lot, and I think you guys are uniquely in this position to just truly help the people hang on to their humanity in in a real way, with a lot of integrity, and make good decisions for themselves towards the end of life. And understanding that, we don't, people in this position don't keep their cognition until the end. It's fluctuating, and it's going to get worse. And so therefore, some things are really of the moment to make decisions about. And the more that you guys can have those conversations in a real, with a lot of love and compassion and truth, what more can you ask for?
Yeah, well, thank you. And I think your piece, and it ties into some of the themes of the film, of naming the terrorist, and the importance of diagnosis. And I'd be curious, actually, since you didn't learn until afterwards, one of the things I counsel people is trying to be able to separate the disease from the person, and being able to separate that, when Robin says this is Lewy body talking, this is not him talking. And how did you manage that without having that diagnosis? And did having the diagnosis help with healing and making sense of that?
Oh boy, yeah. Our path is kind of what you don't want to have happen, for everybody involved. It's incredibly challenging. And as I said, we improvised, because we didn't have a name for this thing. We both knew there was something deeply wrong. And when he got the Parkinson's diagnosis, I could tell Robin wasn't buying it, and I fairly quickly, I had the same feeling, like there's just something more. So, the way that we coped with that was just to, as I said, I mean, I think anyone who's a parent will kind of have a general understanding of, all of a sudden, your kid is acting out, and it's like, how do you redirect? I'm a mother of two. They're older now, 23, 24, but they were, all along the way as a parent, you're trying to redirect towards the positive, and like, okay, if something's not working here, let's go try this here. And that's what you do as a good friend, as a, a member of society, as a good son or daughter, or just any of that. What can you do in this moment that's going to help this person? Identifying what was the disease and what was Robin was really scary for me personally,
Yeah.
because and I've heard this from many other people who've gone through this. You feel like you're grieving the loss of your loved one long before they're gone. And I had no experience with this, but that's what I was watching. And so yeah, on the front end, incredibly challenging. And on the back end, after Robin had passed, getting the diagnosis was that's where my own personal healing really began. And because I got to put together, kind of like a detective situation. Okay, the fact that his amygdala was completely run over with the alpha-synuclein and all the Lewy bodies. That is the response. That's where we get our response to fear and anxiety and those sorts of things. I felt like I found the smoking gun, because Robin, of all the symptoms he had over 40, that was by far one of the worst. And so everything started to make sense, like dominoes in reverse. I went, this is the source of this. This is the source of this. And if only Robin could have known. If only Robin could have known as this was going on. And that is what's driven me, is to have that be made right in the world, that truth, and also so that other people don't have to go through that. Yeah.
Yeah. A question from the audience, which was a question I had as well, if you feel comfortable answering it. Do you feel any anger or resentment at the medical system and doctors that, for not having that diagnosis when Robin was alive?
Yeah, it's interesting. So some people have asked me along the way, like, come on, are you mad? Are you angry? And I gotta say, I could have gone there easily. I could have easily gone. There are many rabbit holes I could have chosen, but I asked myself, what's the point? When I pretty quickly understood from researching this, finding out about this is so complex. How can you blame anybody? How can you blame anybody with a straight face? This thing is incredibly complex, and it's not anyone's fault per se, so, and besides, what good would that do anyway? I mean, you could say that in some, there were easily, you could say that about different parts on our journey, but what good would that do? And really, what good would that do? And so I've chosen to put my energy towards the solution, and really kind of pulling out for people to see from our experience. This is the current environment of this disease. This is kind of common. Unless you have really good healthcare, unless you have a real knowledgeable team, you might end up in a situation like what we had. So, but yeah, I'm grateful I haven't spent a lot of time being, mad.
Yeah, no, as you say, and it's a systems issue, and so you could, you can go down this rabbit hole, or you can figure out ways that we change the system,
Right.
Which is important. To that point, and tying into a couple questions that we have here, as a caregiver, and as somebody who's I'm assuming spoken to a lot of other caregivers since making this film, what kinds of supports should we be advocating for and promoting to support the families of people living with Lewy body?
Yeah, one of the first things I do is well, there's a few things I like to really touch on is, you know, if someone, I mean, if someone comes to me and they know that their loved one has Lewy body, it's like they are so far ahead of where we were. And that's where I talk about the community. And I mention organizations like Lewy Body Dementia Association out of Atlanta. And, and now I can certainly, coming to know you guys and what you're doing, you're another organization that are key, and will grow into playing even more pivotal roles as more people understand the value of this, right? And so I like to be able to, depending on what people are after, if they have good care, that's terrific. I do. There's one thing I always try and make clear is, do they know that they really need to be careful about antipsychotics? And when that's the first thing that clinicians or doctors might think need to be prescribed, if the person's got LBD, you really got to check and make sure that you're not. You just got to be careful. So that's always something I mention. Having a care team that's working together, and having those tough conversations, like, it's not a great diagnosis. Like, let's be honest about that. It's not. And guess what? You don't have to be a victim. There are things you can do, like, one person I had a conversation with, which was kind of tough, but they were open to it, is, have you thought about donating your brain? Have you thought about, so there's being a part of clinical trials, research trials, if you're up for that, or donating to research, or, donating your brain to research, to having these kinds of explorations, because what that does. And or even one woman recently, I found out she just got diagnosed, and she's becoming an advocate for LBD. And she's super excited about it. She was in a position where she could quit her job, rotate, put her focus on that, and it's fulfilling to her. It's giving her meaning. And that's what matters, is what I want to say, is the meaning matters.
Right.
That's it. So those are some of the things I talk about.
Yeah, makes sense. A question here. What, and again, from your perspective, it's from Lily, is how to communicate with patients and families about both uncertainty and about how to break the bad news. And I think what they're also wanting to hear is from a family perspective of, I guess some physicians, as you might, as I think you articulated, are worried that they're going to take away hope, or that, telling the truth is going to be devastating.
Yes.
And
Thank
so,
you. That's a great question. And I would love, I mean, I'm not a doctor, but if I mean, and I do not envy being in that position. And what I would envision as very helpful is the truth, and also, and coming at it with, and this is something I tell people as well, is while Robin's case was extreme, it's his case, well, it's not unique, it was extreme. And this is something I've really come to understand about this disease, is that not the disease progression is very different for everybody. I mean, there are some people, Ted Turner, he's had a long road with this. And he's also had a really good care team. And I think that's something to look at, is that, when you're surrounded with people who have knowledge of this and are, anyway, that's just an important thing I would underscore, is that the disease progression is different for everybody. So that's like I see that as the good news, and that there's always hope. And, again, back to and that the person, you're not alone. That's something you are not alone in this disease. And you can mention the numbers, 1.5 million in the United States. And that's so conservative, but that is a number from the NIH. And it's actually stated as more than Parkinson's. You're not alone, and you do have power here in what you can do. And, granted, yeah, there's not a cure, and guess what? You can help others with your position, and that can end up being a very powerful position. So, and also having a diagnosis is huge, because it allows you to get into these preventative measures, which can really help not only perhaps prolong, but also make the journey more quality at the end, more meaningful for you and your family, and where you can actually maybe help, what your grandchildren might be going through. And here's another thing too, is that, so this is not a largely genetic disease. It's very little. Most of it's environmental triggers. And so there's a lot of ways to help around that too. And kind of, you can go on your own detective thing, and look at, well, maybe how do we think this came about, and what can we do? And it comes back to meaning. But I applaud anyone who's in the position of giving the news, and that I know it's got to take a tremendous amount of bravery and courage. And again, back to a parent analogy, I was always amazed. I always took the tack that my kids know way more than I think they do. And I think that's an important tack to take, and what would you want to know as a clinician? Would you want the truth? And how would you want someone to deliver that to you? What do you think are like the top 3 or 5 things to know in that appointment? And that might help you get there.
And a couple more questions before we wrap up. And this actually ties on to some of those points that you said there. Different than cancer, there seems to be, this is a very common illness, and a lot of people have never heard of it. And it feels to me that part of that has to do with social stigma, that there's stigma around dementia, there's stigma around neurologic disorders, there's certainly stigma around hallucinations. What advice do you have for patients and families, as you did so courageously with your film, of breaking that stigma, of coming out of the closet, and letting people know about this illness?
Yeah, I think, this sort of thing just takes time to really move perceptions. And it also takes people going through it. And there are a lot of people going through it, and more, as diagnosis becomes more of a thing, those numbers, that 1.5 is going to be kind of blown out of the water, I think. And and I just think this realm of neurodegeneration, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and Lewy body is just a lot bigger than we think. And everyone who lends their voice to it, again, even if you're just sharing with your family, let's say you're not comfortable sharing your diagnosis with work or any circles outside your family, even if you're just doing that, that makes a difference. So like, I don't underestimate, you know, though each of us are just a grain of sand, like don't underestimate the power of that. And so it's really talking about it and helping people get to that. And it might be too, like in my case, I had to, in order to be able to explain this to people and protect my husband post-mortem, you know, I'm trying to protect Robin, not only while he's alive, but after, is I had to understand this disease really well. I had to understand how this thing worked. And like I said, that brought healing and understanding to me. And it also put me in a position of being able to help others, and hopefully shave off the stigma out there just a little bit, you know. So if you're in a position where you're curious about something, and again, maybe it's your own situation, you go, well, how did this happen? Where did this come from? You know, start like pulling on a thread. It'll give you meaning, and it might end up helping a lot of people and shoot down some stigma too. So.
Yeah. And ties into my last question. What advice, a lot of our members, whether they're healthcare providers, their patients, their family, are advocates. And so curious to know what advice do you have for advocates on their advocacy journey? And a related question is, I'm curious of how Robin Williams' life and his energy and who he was as a person, has that influenced your advocacy and the way you approach things?
Yeah, so the first part of that, I think it's really deeply personal. Advocacy is deeply personal, and anyone who becomes an advocate, they're there because of something deeply personal. And my experience with that is, while in the beginning, you know, we're 8 years out now, right? It was 2014 we lost Robin, and I think, or he left. He decided he needed to go, and you know, initially it felt like a very heavy responsibility on my shoulders because of who he was. And that felt like a heavy load for a long time, you know, and the film was one part of how can I carry this message? You know, first it was defining the truth, and then it was trying to carry the truth. And there was a lot of different ways, that opportunities that opened up and seemed like a good idea to follow, to pursue, to stay on target with what I felt, you know, what message needed to be delivered. And then there came a point where I really truly felt, there were a few points where I felt like, wow, this is feeling good. You know, if I do the 2-foot drop and go from my head to my heart and go, okay, wow, this information is actually now being taught in neurology classes. Amazing. This is amazing. You know, awareness, like things were starting to change. And then when the film was done, that was another big moment of, it's actually being received. The information is being received the way we'd hoped and being digested and will hopefully be used for good. And so for me personally, that was another really big turning point as an advocate where, okay, I can now actually start to breathe. I can start to go back to the fact that I'm an artist. I have a job. Advocacy isn't my job. And I didn't choose it. It was a responsibility that I felt. It was my mission. And I think that advocates feel that way, you know? And so my thought is, be true to your heart about what your role is. And it may not be that you're a forever advocate. It might be for a period of time, or that might change a little bit. For me personally, I made a conscious decision once I felt like in here, okay, I've done a lot of heavy lifting, and I think I've sparked a real conversation, and I can start turning the notch down a little bit. So now I can go back to what I think Robin would really want me to be doing, which is painting and being a mom and a daughter and a member of society and living my life. And I am grateful to have opportunities to keep my feet wet in this world of advocacy, and to you know, I think I will always be an advocate for the rest of my life, but I'm more than just that. And that's what I want to say to people who are advocates, is just, I hope I'm getting that across. You don't need to drown in it. You may feel like you need to for a while because you're on a mission, but stay cognizant of the fact that you're not alone and there's other people who can tow the weight as well. So
Thank you. No, that's a great advice, and we don't want our advocates to burn out.
right.
So I want to thank you. I think the world is a better place because Robin Williams was in it. The world is a better place because of you, and we thank you so much. And it's really my pleasure and honor to have you as our Advocate of the Year this year.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's been an honor, and I'm just so grateful. Thank you, Benzie, and everyone.